Hi, everybody. Hang on. Oh, wow. Alrighty. We'll wait for a few people to come in. We are live in Irvington, Indiana. And this is a great little historic town just outside of Indianapolis. It's one of the first neighborhoods, suburban neighborhoods outside of Indianapolis. It's populated by a lot of artists and kind of eccentrics back then. It was founded in 1870 by Sylvester Johnson and Jacob Julian, and I'm actually on Julian Street right now. And the town was named Irvington, excuse me, after Washington Irvington visited the area when he was in Indianapolis, and said it reminded him of his hometown of Tarrytown, or Sleepy Hollow now. I'm going to try to come back the other direction. I was going to try to park next to the Masonic Lodge, but they're doing like sewer work, so that didn't quite happen. But Masonic Lodge number 666 is here in Irvington, and it was completed in 1922. It's got a lot of beautiful 20s era flourishes on it, and it's rumored that it was home to secret Ku Klux Klan meetings in the 1920s, because the Indiana Grand Dragon, D.C. Stevenson, lived just a few blocks away, and we're going to go by his house as well. So this is the beginning of our Irvington tour. We're going to drive a little bit. Irvington was the home of Butler University from 1875 to 1928. In 1928, it was deemed too noisy because of the railroad tracks that border the town and that border the campus. So they moved to a field northwest of Irvington, up closer into Indianapolis, but at the time it was like the northern suburbs of Indianapolis. Let's see here. These are a lot of little narrow roads. The first church of Irvington is right next to me. It was called the Church of the Circle. And it's now the Irvington Presbyterian Church, but it still holds services. It was built in the late 1800s. A lot of really cute little old farmhouses, and once we get into the Butler area, you'll see a lot of beautiful grand houses. Let's see. I'm going to kind of go a little bit backwards from what I was planning on, but that's all right. We have time. Hope it's not too windy for you. Let's see. This intersection was where the railroad originally went, and the Lincoln funeral train passed right through that intersection that we just stopped at. And it's rumored that the Lincoln ghost train comes through there every late April, or maybe not every late April, but in late April occasionally. And people gather to come and see if they can see the ghost train. We are now getting into the area that was the Butler campus. A lot of beautiful old homes here. So a lot of these homes were well, down the road a little bit, a lot of the homes down here were part of the Butler College campus, including the Bona Thompson building, or Bona Thompson. There's still a little bit of discrepancy on exactly how to pronounce the name. It's Bonna. And I'll tell you more about her and her life and her family in just a minute when we get down there. So some of the houses on the right were part of the college campus. And if you see the white picket fence to the right, that is actually the D.C. Stevenson home. And we'll get into that in a moment. Alrighty, up ahead here is the Bona Thompson Library. And I'm going to pull in down here and kind of angle the camera for you. No, I don't think I can. Okay, well, we'll go back around. The street is too narrow to park on both sides, so we will go around behind it and come up the other side. I hope it's not too noisy with the wind, but it's pretty hot and humid out, so I'm trying to drive with the windows down here. So we're coming around the back of the Bona Thompson. There's a sign saying Historical Irvington Flats is under renovation, which is great. They're going to build some or restore some apartments or some buildings into apartments. And we're coming back up on Bona Thompson Library or Memorial. And kind of park over here. And I'm going to take you guys off the holder. Okay, sorry, it's going to get a little bump. Okay. This is the Bona Thompson Memorial Building. It's now home to the Indianapolis and Irvington Historical Society. And put you back on the holder here. Okay. So hold on. I'll scoot you over a little bit. Sorry. There we go. So the history behind the Bona Thompson building. Bona Thompson was a young lady who attended Butler when it was a female finishing school, and she graduated. And let me back up. In the 1880s, Edward Thompson moved his family here so that his daughter could go to the finishing school, which was Butler. And she graduated from Butler, and as a graduation gift, she spent a year in Europe. And is pretty common in those days for young women of wealthy families to go to Europe for a year or two. So she did that, as was expected. And when she returned home, she actually caught typhoid fever and died 2 years later. So she was the only surviving daughter. So her parents donated $40,000 and land directly across from their house. And their house is the house that we're staring at, kind of towards the left, the brick house. That's where their house used to stand. That's not their house now. It's been torn down. But they donated the $40,000 to her memory. and built the library for Butler University. And it was slated to be torn down several times. There used to be a huge fountain in the front, and at one point in time, there was a wrecking ball right in front of the fountain, and was going to knock it down, and the machine malfunctioned. So that was after several other attempts on paper to knock it down. So it was, but it was finished in 1902, and it was Butler's campus library from 1902 until 1928. Until that's 1928 was when Butler moved. Like I mentioned before, they moved up to the northern part of Indianapolis. But both of Bonna's parents, died before the building was completed. It is made out of limestone and still stands today. So it's one of the last remaining buildings of when Butler University was down here in Indianapolis. Now, alrighty, we're back. Sorry about that. Lost the stream for a minute. The person that lives in the D.C. Stevenson house, which is where we're going next, does not really like people telling stories. Because, it's his family home, and he just doesn't like that. So we're going to drive by, but it is the house with the white picket fence that you can see over here to the left. And I'm going to go ahead and go beyond it a little bit and then pull over and talk, so that way the homeowner doesn't feel like I'm talking about his home. But it has a very interesting story. So we'll go down here and sit down, park and talk a little bit. As you can see, there's some beautiful old homes. Really narrow streets, because when this place was founded, cars were not a thing, so they just had to have horses. And horses and wagons down here, and there wasn't enough people here to have very many at one time, so small streets are fine. Were fine back then. It's a beautiful house up ahead behind that hedge called the Benton House, which is amazing. It has been restored. This in front of us is Irvington Circle, and they have a bust of Washington Irving, the namesake, right there. No, we're gonna go down here. Now the railroad tracks are right in front of us, so you can see how close they were to the school and why the school had issues when the buildings had their windows open in the summer when it was hot, because they didn't have air conditioning back in the early 1900s. So they had to have their windows open during class, and the trains would come rumbling by, so they had to find a new spot for the campus, and they did that, like I mentioned, in some of the unoccupied fields in northern Indianapolis. Let's see. Go ahead, you didn't have a stop sign. Can't park on this side of the street. Darn it. Well, the big building to our left is now a school, as you can tell with some of the students coming out. but it used to be the Indiana Children's Home. Now it's Irvington Preparatory Academy. And the Indianapolis Children's Home was where children went. It wasn't necessarily an orphanage, but like if their parents were in jail or were unfit, it was before the foster care system, so it was kind of like one big foster house. So the kids would go there. And be taken care of by the state. If their like I said, if their families were in jail or were deemed unfit. Alrighty, folks. Thank you. Not in the middle of the road. So the kids would kind of go there. I'm gonna pull over in here. Make sure there's no students crossing. That white marker marks the area of the railroad tracks. So now that I've found a spot to kind of hang out, I am going to tell you a little bit about the D.C. Stevenson house. Once again, that was the house that was with the white picket fence that was right over by the Bona Thompson Library. That used to be the library for Butler. So the Stevenson Mansion is actually now officially called the Graham House. It was built for William H. Graham, who was associated with the Benjamin Harrison administration. And it was also a sorority home when Butler College was there for the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority. And housed students in 1923 until 1928. In 1923, Stevenson acquired the home and remodeled it to look like a Georgian mansion, a Civil War area mansion, plantation, and he was one of the was the Grand Dragon of Indiana's KKK. He actually killed a young woman named Marge Oberhauser. And there's a whole story behind that, but I can't go in front of her house and tell it because there's a whole bunch of students around, so I don't want to try to park there and talk about that with all those guys around. So I will tell that story later. But anyway, she did a deathbed confession and basically told the police everything that he had done, and she pretty much single-handedly brought down the KKK in Indiana. He had at the time, Stevenson had complete control over the government. So he determined the governor, the mayor, the senators for the state, all of that. And this was also the first court case that was decided by a dental imprint. And so it's the first time that dental imprints were used in a court case. And like I said, I'll go over the specifics at a later date on that. I may make that its own stream. So now we're going to go to another super infamous person's home. And we're going to go to the home that H.H. Holmes lived in while he was in Irvington. And H.H. Holmes was labeled one of the first serial killer in the country. And, ooh, there's a parking spot right here. Yay. Don't mind me, ma'am. This house to the right. Let's see if I can make this better. Probably not. Okay, well, this house right there. Hi, Red. This is a replica of the Holmes house. It's not his actual house. The actual house burned down. And, oh, somebody's parking behind me. Okay, so I'll move up. So H.H. Holmes lived in Irvington. In 1894. He came here after he was in the Chicago World's Fair and built his infamous murder castle in Chicago. Indianapolis is only like a 2-3 hour drive from Chicago, so it wasn't hard for him to kind of scoot over here and avoid detection. He picked Irvington because at the time it was an outlying little city. It was basically just fields. So, a little bit of a background on Holmes. He hooked up with a gentleman named Heitzel, and they ended up doing insurance scams together. And Holmes, who was a master manipulator, was able to convince Heitzel to let him take care. Hold on. He was able to convince Heitzel to let him take care of his 2 young children. Actually, 3 young children, 2 girls and a boy. And he brought the boy, Howard, with him here. I'm going to get out of the way of the bus. And took Howard with him, to do various errands in the neighborhood, so people saw him with the young boy. And he then he went down to the drugstore with Howard, and it was in October, so Howard was wearing a jacket. It was cool. So he went down to the pharmacy and picked up medication, because at that time you could pretty much pick up anything over the counter, and took it home. And that night he actually drugged Howard and killed him. And Howard was a 10-year-old boy, and dismembered him and buried him in little tiny holes all over the property. Like I said, at the time, that house was just sort of in a big lot. It now has been broken up into 42 separate lots, so they really don't know. They never really reconstructed poor little Howard. They did find his stomach and other contents in a pipe stove that was in the bottom or the basement of the house. The folks remembered Holmes because he had come in and asked for a wood-burning stove, which would be equivalent now of somebody coming into a store and asking for a black and white television. Nobody used wood-burning stoves anymore in that time period. Gas was around, and coal, and so nobody used wood. So the people that sold him the stove and that delivered it remembered him because it was an odd request. And the druggist, he came in the next day to the drugstore and gave the druggist little Howard's jacket for the druggist's children. And the druggist remembered the little boy wearing it. And Holmes has said, he doesn't need it now. So the druggist was kind of like, well, that's weird because it's just getting colder than it was. So it's not like in the spring. So the Pinkerton detective agencies, which were kind of like the national police force at the time, sorry about the bumps, guys, had been trying to find Holmes for a while now, and they knew he had been to Indianapolis, so they just kind of thought, on a whim they would check the outskirts. And so when one of the Pinkerton officers came here, he just kind of said, well, hey, has anybody seen this guy? And showed his picture. And the pharmacist said, yeah, I saw that guy, and he had a little boy with him, and then he doesn't have the little boy anymore, and that's kind of weird. And the people who sold him the stove said, yeah, we know where he is, and we know where he lives, or we've seen him and we know where he lives, because they delivered the stove. So they took him to Holmes's house, and Holmes had already left. So they nosed around the house, and they put a few police officers up there just to kind of keep the scene secure, place that he was. And that night, there were some little curious boys that started going poking around. So they went poking around in the house and found this stove and found what they thought was a football. So they brought it out and were playing with it, and the cops, the officers that were stationed there, saw them, and they were kind of like, hey, you kids, you got to get out of here. What are you playing with? And they said, oh, this football we found in a stove. And the officer said, well, that was weird. So he took the football away from him and kind of poked at it, and it burst open. And sorry to be a little graphic, but that was the internal remains of little Howard Peitzel. Found his jawbone in the stove, in the ashes. So they cordoned off the house and concluded that had been Peitzel's final resting place, or the area had been. And that was one of the only murders. Well, Holmes confessed over 200, but it was hard to actually directly pin him on things because he was so good at being elusive and covering his tracks. And if you want to know more about that part of it, you can look into the story Devil in the White City. That's all about Holmes in Chicago, building his murder castle, and killing men and women that came to Chicago for the World's Fair. So that's pretty much it about Irvington. I will tell you guys a little bit more about Marge Abelhauser, probably the next time I come back. And if you want to stay with me, I'm just going to kind of head east here on National Road. Like I had mentioned in several of my other posts, National Road was the first federally sanctioned roadway, pathway. It was the first pathway that was supported by the government to go across states. And it starts in Cumberland, Maryland, and ends in Vandalia, Illinois. It was supposed to go all the way across, but it ended up running out of funding, and presidential administrations changed and all that kind of political stuff. But this is a part of it, and it was the parts out in the rural territories were toll roads. So property owners set up tolls, little toll bridges and toll houses on their property, so that way they could be paid for people traveling through. The government paid for the land, but the homeowners could pay for use of it, the government paid for the road, but homeowners could pay for use of the road, could charge for use of the road. So a lot of them did. There is a theory that National Road was set on a ley line, and I'll give you a little bit of information on ley lines, but you can definitely find out more, including maps and stuff, by researching ley lines. It's Leylins. And the theory is that animals would follow animals would follow like a magnetic pathway, similar to latitude and longitude, and how you find, how you use a compass using the magnetic direction of the poles. Animals have the instinct to follow these ley lines and would follow them to water. And so as animals would follow them, okay, no problem, Red. See you later. Thanks. Good luck at your orientation. So as animals would follow those ley lines, people would follow the animals, primarily the Native American tribes in the area, in order to hunt them, and they became Indian traces. And then, since the traces were already kind of, pretty much patted down and been made into a path, the white settlers came and retraced it with their wagons and patted it out more. And then the road was eventually basically a mud path, and they cut down trees and widened it so that way it could handle more traffic. And then they used bricks and cobblestones, and then they paved it over, and it's the road that we're on now. So it's still a road that we use. It goes through a lot of great areas in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, I think. I honestly forget the little area where it turns off, but it ends up in Cumberland. And it's still very widely used today. And I love taking this road. There is a freeway that was built in the 60s and 70s, maybe 50s, that sort of circumvents National Road or Route 40. But I really like National Road because of the history, and it goes through all the cute little small towns, and I just love the feeling on it. I feel very connected to all the people who have traveled on it in the past. Whereas on an interstate you have trucks and semis and billboards, and on National Road you don't have very much of that. I mean, obviously you do a little bit in the cities, but you'll see as we go out, there really isn't all of that chaos that you get on interstate roads. We're coming up to the little eastern suburb of Cumberland, and they have intentionally put brick pavers in, and I'm going to slow down and let you hear. I know it's windy, sorry, but I'm going to let you hear what it sounds like for your tires to go over the bricks, because they did this to kind of emulate what it sounds like at the Brickyard 400, or 500, excuse me. So I don't know if you can hear that. We'll go over several more. I've got people behind me, so I can't go too slowly. But we'll see. If I know the wind is probably messing with it too. I'm going to move over and let these people around me, so that way I can go slow and not sort of hold them up. So once again, we're just going over some of the bricks. There you go. Maybe you could have heard it. Maybe you heard it with the car next to me. Actually, I'll kind of speed up so that way I'm next to them again, so you can hear the car next to me going over the bricks. No, they turned. Oh well. There. I don't know if you heard my tires on it or not, but They did that so that way you kind of, because that's the outskirts of Indianapolis, and that way you kind of have the notion of the Indy 500 and the Brickyard, and at the end, the beginning and the end of each lap at the Brickyard, there is a strip. Their tires go over the bricks, and it makes that same sound. So they put it in the far eastern suburb to kind of let you know you're coming into Indianapolis, home of the Brickyard. And I don't know if they have it on the western suburbs or not. I haven't really come into Indianapolis from the west or paid attention the times that I have. So I'm not really sure. But we're going to come up to Greenfield in a little bit. And Greenfield is where Riley is from. And we'll try to stop by his house, or stop in front of his house, and show you a little bit of that. It's also where Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical company, was based. And we'll go past their original factory buildings. I'll show you those. And tell you a few little interesting tidbits about Riley when we get up closer to his home. But Riley was a poet, and he is most famously known for creating the Little Orphan Annie series. And like I said, I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get closer. There's also rumors that the first time the nickname of Hoosier was used was in a Riley poem. That is really up for interpretation. There's a lot of ideas about where the term Hoosier came from. One of them, all of these are a little far-fetched. I really haven't found a solid answer. Like I said, I'm a transplant, so I researched it. There's 20 million rumors. So if you guys have a good rumor about it, or I know some of you guys live in Indiana too, so if any of you guys have a good rumor or know for sure where the term Hoosier came from, please put it in the comments. I would love to know. One of the other, I'll wait for these two to figure out what they're doing. One of the other rumors is that it was from the dialect in southern Indiana. It's kind of a slang for who's here. People would knock on the door and you'd say, who's here? So that got shortened or squished into Hoosier, or Hooser. But like I said, they're all just kind of myths, rumors. So yeah, if you guys have an idea of where the term came from, please tell me. I love history and I love finding out facts. I'm okay with rumors, but I prefer facts, obviously. So now we're kind of moving out of the Indianapolis suburbs into kind of the rural areas out here. A lot of this is corn and soybean land. Like I said, you don't see a whole lot of corn, a lot of billboards and semis and all that. You do occasionally, but it's not like being on the interstate. So it's just a lot more low-key, a lot more slower paced, a lot less traffic. People on this road are not generally in a hurry, so that's good. It's just a lot more peaceful out here, and I prefer it to kind of the chaos of of 70 and those sorts of roadways. These little towns, some of them are hanging on by a thread. Some of them have rolled up. It used to be a lot more populated before I-70 went through the northern part, about 5-10 miles north of us. That happened, as is common. A lot of these little towns kind of lost all of their through traffic, and therefore kind of lost their longevity. Still a lot of beautiful old homes, a lot of family homes, and family farms. This cemetery to the right is, nope, I'm wrong, never mind. I was going to say that's where the basis of Little Orphan Annie is buried, but that's not true. It's on the other side of Greenfield. This is the little town of Philadelphia, Indiana. Every time I go through here, I want a cheesesteak, but alas, no cheesesteaks. One of these days, I will get to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and get a cheesesteak. And that will happen. I mark my word on that. That will happen. I don't know when, but someday I will get a Philly cheesesteak from Geno's, or is it Geno's or Ron's or something? There are two names, and they're on opposite corners, and they both claim to have the best cheesesteaks. And they've been in a competition for the cheesesteaks for decades. I remember one is Geno's. I don't remember what the other one was, or is. I think it's Ron's. It's another gentleman's name. But you guys can look that up and find out. But I will get a cheesesteak from one of those two, or if I'm lucky, both of those cheesesteak locations. And you know what? That was the cemetery that the little girl, or the lady, when she passed, who was the basis of Little Orphan Annie, is buried in. And in just a little bit, we're going to come up on the original Eli Lilly Pharmaceutical Company. They have it all fenced off. It kind of looks like a prison, or for my California folks, it almost looks like a mission. It's definitely built in California mission style, with the arches and the barrel tile roofs and the stucco. I'm not sure why. I don't know if Lilly was from the West Coast or just liked that type of architecture, or I don't know. I should look into that. But anyway, this is the town of Greenfield. It's also where J.C. Phelps, the Olympic gold gymnast, lived, was born and raised. So it has a little bit more of a recent claim to fame as well. Sorry for the wind, but it's getting a little warm with the windows up here. So we are coming up to the Lilly, what used to be the Lilly plant. Now it's another pharmaceutical. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see it off to the left. It's kind of a big field, and maybe if you look on the far left, you can see it. See if I can kind of angle my car. No, probably not. Sorry guys, you're not really going to be able to see it. But this is where Lilly was, and now it's conveyance. I don't know if it's, I think it's in pharmaceutical, I don't really know what Conveyance is, but that's who owns it now. Lilly has since moved to a larger plant in Indianapolis. So we're going to continue on here through Greenfield. We're going to stop in front of the Riley house, the James Whitcomb Riley house. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. And, well, mainly about little orphan Annie. And how she kind of came to be featured in his poems. And actually, the Little Orphan Annie comic strip is pretty different than the James Whitcomb Riley poems. In the poems, she was kind of evil. And was a little scary. So I guess they softened her when they did the comics. But if you guys want to read the original, look up James Whitcomb Riley Little Orphan Annie poems, and you'll see what I mean. She kind of threatens the kids with things are going to come eat them, and all kinds of kind of crazy, scary stuff. There's a little sign you can see, James Whitcomb Riley House, 250 West Main Street. And we are on West Main Street. Well, actually, we're on East Main Street at the moment, but... Or no, we are on West, sorry. Greenfield, also has an amazing courthouse. I love the courthouses in the Midwest. They are what I always imagined courthouses should be, and my hometown of Glendale, I love it, but the courthouse is basically a big shoebox. It's not very pretty. The Midwest courthouses are beautiful limestone, mostly, at least in Indiana. All the Indiana's buildings have Indiana limestone in them. It's sort of a requirement. I guess to showcase the limestone that Indiana is known for, or was known for. I'm not really sure if we still have a whole lot of limestone left. We might. I don't know that much about our limestone stock or quarries. So I'm going to try to pull over right across from the James Whitcomb Riley house. We'll see if this happens, if there's parking. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. Can't tell yet. Yeah, close enough. Sorry, kind of had to do that quickly because there's trucks and a car behind me. So I'm going to park. I'm going to roll down the window. I'm going to take you guys off your little holder. The White House here is the James... Oops, sorry about the traffic. It's the James Whitcomb Riley house. And this is where James Whitcomb Riley grew up. It's a little, where is it? State sign. Oh, you can't really read. Let me see if I can... I don't have the spokes focus. You can't really read it from here. It's just going to make it difficult with traffic going by, so I'm not going to zoom in. But this was the house that James Whitcomb Riley grew up in with his brother and family. The Rileys were a pretty wealthy family. I don't remember, but I think his father was a lawyer, something like that. So anyway, they were a wealthy family. Greenfield was sort of a small town, but what a lot of times wealthy families would do is take in boarders and people to kind of do housekeeping and be a nanny for the kids. And so they took in a young girl named Allie, and Allie would play with the kids and kind of do basic housework and stuff like that. And so when James Whitcomb Riley began writing, he wrote stories from his childhood, which included Allie. And I'm going to put you guys back on the little holder here, because that way it'll get you a little bit away from the traffic noise and I can roll up the window. Sorry, there's some traffic noise. But so he wrote stories about Allie, who was their house, well, sort of house servant, sort of. And so he ended up getting published. And at that time, the publishers would use handwritten manuscripts to publish their type. They didn't have typewriters and all that, or not very many people did. And James Whitcomb Riley certainly did not have one. So he sent his handwritten manuscripts to the printer, and the printer mistook the L in Allie as N. So instead of Allie, she became known as, instead of Little Orphan Allie, she became known as Little Orphan Annie, because he thought that James Whitcomb Riley's L's in Allie were N's, and therefore spelled the name Annie. So it changed her name from Allie to Annie. So there actually really was no Little Orphan Annie. She was Little Orphan Allie. There was no Annie. She was actually Little Orphan Allie. And it cost too much to change after it had been printed, so they just left it as Annie. So if you're ever back at the cemetery in Philadelphia, Indiana, you need to look for Allie instead of Annie. And I don't know her last name, but I believe that there's also an indicator stating that it's the final resting place of Little Orphan Annie as well, but her actual name was Annie. Excuse me. Gosh darn it, I keep doing that. Her actual name was Allie. So thanks to some sloppy penmanship, Little Orphan Annie exists. So I am going to go ahead and stop it at this point. Been going on for like 53 minutes, so that's more than enough time. I will do more Travels with Tracy. This Tuesday, stay tuned. We're going to go to the state fair. I'm going to bring you along. So that'll be fun. And I will talk with you guys later. Okay, let me flip around here. Alrighty. Bye, everyone. See you later. Have a great Friday. Oh, I can't put my hand in front of there. Alrighty. Bye.